Hello everyone, you are on the channel The Middle Ages. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to feast like a king in a medieval castle? Forget those movie scenes with people tearing at turkey legs and throwing bones over their shoulders. The reality of a medieval banquet was far more complex, fascinating, and sometimes downright bizarre. Today we're pulling back the heavy velvet curtain to reveal the incredible world of medieval feasts. We'll uncover what they ate, how they behaved, and what all that pomp and circumstance was really about. So grab a goblet and let's journey back in time. First, let's set the scene. A grand hall, lit by hundreds of candles and roaring fires. Long wooden tables draped in white linen. The air is thick with the smells of roasting meat, exotic spices, and wood smoke. This wasn't just dinner. It was a major social and political event. Banquets were used to celebrate weddings, religious holidays, military victories, or to impress visiting nobles. Your status determined everything, from where you sat to what you ate. The most important people, like the king, queen, and high-ranking lords and ladies, sat at the high table. This was often a raised platform at one end of the hall, putting them on display for everyone to see. The further you sat from the high table, the lower your social standing. This arrangement wasn't just for show. It was a constant visual reminder of the strict social hierarchy. Even the salt was a status symbol. A fancy, ornate salt cellar was placed on the high table, and only the most important guests were above the salt. So what was on the menu? Well, it was a carnivore's dream. The medieval elite loved their meat. You'd see massive roasts of beef, pork, and venison, but they also ate things we might find a little strange today. Think swan, peacock, crane, and even heron. These weren't just roasted and served. They were often painstakingly redressed in their own feathers after cooking to look alive and majestic on the platter. It was all about presentation and showing off the host's wealth and power. Fish was also a huge part of the menu, especially on Fridays and during Lent, when the church forbade eating meat. But this wasn't just your average fish and chips. We're talking about sturgeon, pike, eels, and even porpoises and beavers, which were cleverly classified as fish by the church. These would be served poached, fried, baked, or jellied. And what about vegetables? You might be surprised to learn they weren't a major feature on the noble table. Root vegetables like carrots, which were often purple or yellow back then, and onions were considered peasant food. The wealthy preferred things that grew above ground, like cabbages, leeks, and peas. Salads of fresh herbs and flowers were also popular. Fruit was enjoyed, but often cooked into pies and tarts or preserved in honey. Now let's talk about the unsung hero of the medieval banquet: bread. Bread was everywhere and served a dual purpose. Not only was it eaten, but thick, stale slices of bread, called trenchers, were used as plates. You'd pile your food onto the trencher, which would soak up all the delicious juices. At the end of the meal, what happened to these soggy trenchers? Well, if you were a generous host, you'd give them to the poor who waited outside the castle gates. If you were a bit less generous, they might just be thrown to the dogs. Spices were the ultimate status symbol. Things like saffron, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were incredibly expensive, coming all the way from the east. Using them generously showed everyone just how rich you were. Sauces were thick, heavily spiced, and often brightly colored with things like saffron for yellow, sandalwood for red, or even parsley for green. The flavors were intense and complex, a world away from what we're used to today. And to wash it all down, wine and ale, of course. Water was often unsafe to drink, so fermented beverages were the go-to. The rich drank imported wine from France, while everyone else drank ale. Wine was sometimes spiced and served warm in a concoction called hippocras. Servants would constantly circle the hall, refilling goblets from ewers. Getting drunk was pretty common, but proper etiquette was still expected. Speaking of etiquette, table manners were a big deal. There were no forks yet for eating. Those came much later. People used spoons, knives, and most importantly, their hands. But this wasn't a free-for-all. You were expected to wash your hands before and during the meal in bowls of scented water brought by servants. You were supposed to eat daintily, using only 3 fingers of your right hand. You weren't supposed to put your elbows on the table slurp your soup, or talk with your mouth full. Sound familiar? Many of our modern table manners have their roots right here in the Middle Ages. But a banquet wasn't just about the food. It was a full-blown sensory experience. Between courses there would be entertainment. This could be anything from a minstrel singing songs and telling stories, to jesters performing tricks, to full-blown acrobatic displays. One of the most spectacular forms of entertainment was the sautelty, or subtlety. These were intricate, edible sculptures made from sugar, marzipan, or pastry. They often depicted castles, mythical beasts, or scenes from history, and were designed to amaze the guests. Imagine a huge pie being brought into the hall. The crust is cut open, and instead of meat, a flock of live birds flies out, fluttering around the rafters. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a real thing called an entremet. These were theatrical interludes designed to dazzle and entertain between the main courses. It was all part of the spectacle, designed to make the feast an unforgettable event. The feast would last for hours, sometimes even days. Course after course would be brought out in a grand procession, often announced by a blast of trumpets. First, lighter dishes, then the main roasts, and finally, sweets and spiced wine to aid digestion. It was a marathon of eating, drinking, and socializing. So why go to all this trouble? A medieval banquet was a powerful tool. For a king or a powerful lord, it was a way to display wealth, secure loyalty, and intimidate rivals. By providing a lavish feast, a host was showing that he had the resources to care for his followers and the power to crush his enemies. Every dish, every spice, every entertainer was a carefully calculated move in the complex game of medieval politics. It was also a rare moment of abundance in a world where famine and hardship were constant threats for most of the population. For the guests lucky enough to be invited, it was a taste of paradise, a glimpse into a world of unimaginable luxury and pleasure. The next time you see a movie depiction of a medieval feast, remember what we've talked about today. It wasn't just a chaotic, messy meal. It was a highly structured, symbolic, and spectacular event that reflected the entire medieval world in a single room. From the peacocks in their feathers to the bread used as plates, every detail had a purpose. It was a delicious and deadly serious game of power, played out with wine, spices, and a whole lot of roasted meat. Thanks so much for joining us on this culinary journey back to the Middle Ages. If you found this as fascinating as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Middle Ages for more deep dives into this incredible era. Let us know in the comments what part of the medieval banquet surprised you the most. We'll see you in the next one.